They say the guillotine was the merciful part. The real death of Marie Antoinette began long before the blade fell. It began in silence, in humiliation, in the small dark spaces where the revolution could hurt her without spilling a drop of blood. The people of France thought they were destroying a queen. What they truly destroyed was a woman trapped inside a palace that had become a tomb. In the final months before her execution, the revolution did not kill her quickly. It stripped her piece by piece, tearing dignity, memory, motherhood, and identity from her body until nothing was left but a ghost sitting upright out of spite. Her enemies wanted her to suffer. They wanted her to witness the slow unmaking of her world. And when Versailles fell, that unmaking began. They dragged her from the palace where she had walked in silk and forced her into a carriage surrounded by jeering crowds. They shouted insults about her body, about her marriage, about her children. Men who once bowed before her now threw mud and spit as if their hatred could stain royalty deeper than blood. But what broke her was not the crowd. It was the sudden silence of those who had once served her. People she had known for years turned their eyes away, pretending she was already dead. Her new prison was the temple, a cold stone fortress whose walls held whispers of torture. The rooms were small, damp, and filled with shadows that moved like thoughts she tried to ignore. Her family was confined with her at first, her husband, her sister-in-law, her 2 children. They were kept under watch night and day by guards who despised them but enjoyed their suffering more than their duty. At night Marie could hear her son crying. She could hear her daughter's soft breathing. She could hear her husband's quiet prayers. But soon even these small sounds were taken from her. One by one they were separated. First her husband was taken away, then her sister-in-law, then her daughter. Each removal felt like a piece of her soul being ripped out carefully, slowly, as if the revolution wished to savor her despair. The final separation was the worst. Guards stormed her room in the middle of the night and tore her young son from her arms. He screamed for her, but she could do nothing. The guards told her to stand still and watch. She did not obey. She fought like a mother, not like a queen. They beat her until she collapsed, but they dragged the boy away anyway and locked him in a separate cell where he would be tortured into accusing her of crimes she had never imagined. After that night, the walls of the temple felt smaller. She slept in a bed soaked with her own tears. She tried to pray, but the prayers stuck in her throat. Every sound in the corridor became a threat. Every footstep felt like an omen. The revolution had not killed her children yet, but it had taken them away and forced her to live without them. That was the beginning of the slow death they wanted for her. When her husband was executed, the guards did not tell her. They let her find out from the muffled cheers of the crowd outside. She pressed her hands to her chest as if trying to hold her heart in place. She did not scream, she did not faint. She simply sat down and folded her hands in her lap, as if accepting her fate with a dignity even her executioners could not take. But they tried. Soon they placed her in solitary confinement in the Concedry, a prison known as the antechamber to death. Her cell was cold and smelled of damp stone. The bed was a straw mattress. A single candle barely lit the room. Guards watched her at all hours, even while she slept, even while she dressed. Privacy was a luxury the revolution would no longer allow her. They made her wear plain clothing, as if fabric could erase her past. They cut her hair short, as if beauty itself was a crime. They stripped her of all jewelry, all personal items, all remnants of a life that had once sparkled like gold. They treated her not like a fallen queen, but like a symbol of every injustice, real or imagined. And every day they reminded her that she no longer owned her own name. Her interrogations began next. They sat her in a room with blazing lamps and demanded she confess to sins that were not hers. Adultery, treason, corruption, even crimes against her own children. She denied the accusations with calm courage until they asked her about her son. They accused her of unspeakable acts, hoping to break her spirit. She rose from her seat, tears burning in her eyes, and said the only words that silenced the room. "I appeal to every mother here." Even hardened revolutionaries looked away in shame. From that moment, her fate was sealed. A woman they could not humiliate was a threat. A queen who still carried dignity was an insult. They decided she would die, but they delayed just long enough to make sure she understood what the world had become without her. During her final weeks, the guards played a cruel game. They spoke to her through bars at night, telling her lies about her daughter, telling her lies about her sister, telling her that her son had confessed things he never said. They watched her face carefully, waiting for cracks in her composure, but she gave them none. Her silence became her rebellion. She grew thinner each day. Her hair turned gray. Her clothes hung loose around her shoulders. She aged years in a matter of weeks. The once lively Queen of Versailles now walked slowly, as if carrying a weight too heavy for her bones. Yet even then the guards noticed she did not bow her head. She held it high because it was the last thing she could choose. But the worst cruelty came at the very end. Before they led her to trial, they forced her into a cell known as the coffin room. It was narrow, suffocating, almost too small for her to lie down. She spent several nights there, unable to stretch her legs, unable to sleep for more than moments. The darkness pressed against her like a second skin. Every sound outside felt like a knife. Her mind frayed at the edges, but she never allowed herself to collapse. Even in that living tomb, she remained upright. By the time they dragged her into court, she was pale, thin, and trembling from exhaustion. The people expected to see a monster. Instead, they saw a woman who had lost everything except her pride. She walked slowly, but she walked alone without assistance. She faced her accusers with steady eyes, and when they pronounced her death sentence, she did not cry. Marie Antoinette did not die at the guillotine. She died in pieces through the slow cruelty that took her family, her dignity, her identity, and finally her hope. The blade was simply the mercy at the end. They say the trial was public, but the humiliation was private. Marie Antoinette knew from the moment she stepped inside that courtroom that she was not there to defend herself. She was there to be displayed, like a trophy carved from the ruins of a fallen kingdom, and every eye that followed her was hungry not for justice, but for revenge. The revolution had become a beast that fed on stories, and she was the story it wanted most. The air inside the chamber was thick and hot, filled with whispers that grew louder every time she lifted her head. They stared at her as if she were a creature dragged out of a myth, something dangerous, something cursed. Her once bright eyes were sunken, her face drawn and colorless, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that unsettled even her enemies. She stood before the table of judges, her wrists trembling but her posture straight. The accusations began. They read them aloud, one by one, each more venomous than the last. Treason, corruption, manipulation, extravagance, criminal influence, and then the darkest accusation, the one meant to break her. They accused her of violating her own son. The room shifted. Even the crowd grew still. Marie did not gasp, did not look away, did not fall to her knees. Instead, she took one small step forward, placing her hands on the edge of the defendant's stand. Her voice was calm and thin, but it carried through every corner of the hall. Nature itself refuses to answer such a charge. I appeal to the mothers who hear me. The silence that followed was not mercy, it was fear. Fear that she had spoken truth. Fear that she had reminded them she was still human. The judges hated her more for that moment of strength than for any crime they believed she had committed. They continued the spectacle anyway. Witnesses came forward. Some lied for coin, some for safety, some simply for the pleasure of hurting a queen. They twisted her actions into sins, her kindness into manipulation, her politeness into schemes. They manufactured a monster because a monster was easier to kill. She stood through all of it without sitting, without asking for water, without wiping the sweat that gathered at her hairline. The guards watching her whispered that she was stubborn, but she was not stubborn. She was surviving the only way she knew how. Hours passed. Her ankles shook. She swayed once, catching herself on the wooden railing. A guard moved to support her, but she lifted one hand, refusing assistance. Another blow to her dignity came next. The prosecutor ordered her examined publicly, claiming her body bore marks of decadent corruption. The words were a thin veil for humiliation. They dragged her into a side chamber and forced her to endure a crude examination under the eyes of strangers. It was not medical, it was punishment. They wrote lies based on what they claimed to see and returned her to the courtroom as if she were no longer a person, only evidence. By the end of the trial, her strength began to unravel, her voice cracked, her breathing grew shallow. Yet when they asked for her final words of defense, she lifted her chin, steadied herself, and spoke with a calm that rattled the walls. I was a queen, but I have learned to suffer. If I must die, I will die innocent. The jury did not discuss long. Her sentence was written before she entered the room. Guilty, death by guillotine, execution at dawn. The crowd erupted outside like an angry storm. She listened to the roar of hatred echoing through the stone, as if the world was already burying her. When she was taken back to her cell, she walked without help, though her legs threatened to give beneath her. In the conciergerie, her cell waited like a grave. The guards closed the door behind her with a heavy thud, and she was alone once more. She sat on her straw mattress, staring at the wall, not thinking, not praying, just breathing. Hours passed. In the deepest part of night, she finally allowed herself to cry. Not for her throne, not for her pride, but for her daughter, for her son, for the life that had been taken from her thread by thread, until only a frayed outline remained. Morning came too soon. The guards entered her cell with candles that burned too bright. She stood up before they could speak. She knew what they were there for. She asked for a moment alone, but they refused. Privacy had been stripped from her long ago. They cut her hair again to expose her neck to the blade. The scissors scraped against her scalp. She did not flinch. One guard said she looked like a shadow of the woman she once was. Another whispered that her eyes still unnerved him. They bound her hands behind her back. The rope was coarse and tight. She winced but held her silence. She asked only one thing: "Let me walk to the cart myself." And they did. When she stepped outside, the cold air stung her skin. The streets of Paris were crowded with thousands who had come to watch. Some shouted insults, some threw stones. Some simply stared with a fascination usually reserved for tragedies or miracles. The soldiers placed her in a wooden cart usually reserved for murderers. She sat upright on the hard bench as the wheels creaked over the uneven street. She did not look down. She looked at the faces around her with a calm that unsettled even her enemies. During the long ride to the scaffold, she saw the places she had once known, now broken, now drowning in anger. She saw shops selling small models of the guillotine. She saw children chanting songs, mocking her name. She saw the city that had once adored her, now feasting on her suffering. The cart reached the place de la Revolution. A sea of faces waited there. The guillotine towered above them all like a judgment carved in wood. She stepped out without stumbling. Her final humiliation happened in the seconds before she climbed the scaffold. The soldiers forced her to walk around the platform instead of taking the direct steps, as was customary. They did this to prolong the moment, to let the crowd see her broken form from every angle. She walked slowly, her dress dragging through mud, her feet bruised by the long journey. Then she made the final mistake of her life. As she stepped onto the platform, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She turned to him and apologized. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." It was a queen's final instinct. Apologizing for nothing, trying to remain graceful even at the edge of death. The executioner bound her to the wooden plank. Her neck was placed in the cold groove of the lunette. The crowd leaned forward, eager to witness the end of a legend they had created. But before the blade fell, she closed her eyes and imagined something no one could take from her. Her children, their faces, their laughter, the brief years when she had been happy. The blade fell fast, and the woman they had tortured for months was gone in one breath. But the cruelty did not stop. The crowd fought for pieces of her body, strands of hair, fragments of clothing, spots of blood from the wooden planks. They wanted souvenirs of a queen they never understood. It was not death that horrified history, it was the slow destruction that led to it. The torment, the humiliation, the stripping away of everything human. Marie Antoinette died only once, but before that the revolution killed her 1,000 times. They buried her quickly because they wanted her gone. Not remembered, not honored, just removed. The revolution wanted her to vanish like smoke rising from the blade that killed her. But death does not always silence a story. Sometimes it awakens it. The body of the former queen was placed into a rough wooden coffin barely large enough to hold her. No ceremony, no priest, no mourning. Only the scrape of wood on stone as the coffin slid into the pit. The earth was cold that morning and the graveyard silent except for the whispers of guards who stood, watched to make sure no royalists dared steal her remains. They marked the grave with nothing. Not a name, not a date, just soil. Paris moved on. Crowds returned to their markets. Newspapers printed stories celebrating the fall of the tyrant. They called her the Austrian woman, the enemy of the people. They printed lies to fill the spaces left by truth, and people believed them because it was easier than admitting the cruelty they had allowed. But inside the city, not everyone slept easily. There were men and women who had watched the trial and the execution with a strange heaviness in their chests. They had seen her calm. They had seen her hold her dignity when stripped of everything else. And they had whispered among themselves that something had gone too far. Even the executioner felt it. Days after the killing, he confessed privately to a friend that the queen had gone to her death with more courage than any man he had killed. He said her apology had shaken him. He said her eyes haunted him. He died months later, still insisting he had taken the life of someone far more human than the mob ever understood. Weeks passed. Rumors began to move through Paris like wind through broken shutters. Some claimed that the queen had cursed the revolution with her final breath. Others said her ghost walked near the Seine at night, pale and silent, searching for her children. A few whispered that the blade had hesitated, as if even the guillotine feared destroying a woman who had once been loved by kings. Most dismissed these stories, but they spread anyway. Inside the temple prison, Marie Antoinette's son, Louis Charles, lay in darkness. He was 8 years old. The revolution had stolen him from his mother long before her execution. They placed him in a cell barely the size of a closet. No light, no comfort, no kindness. They beat him. They forced confessions from him. They taught him to curse his mother. They tried to turn a child into a weapon of propaganda. He grew sick. His voice weakened. He whispered for his mother even after being told she was dead. He asked the guards if he could see her grave. They laughed. The cruelty inflicted on her family did not end with her death. It simply shifted. Her daughter survived, but not unchanged. Alone in her cell, she would repeat her mother's name over and over until her voice cracked. She was eventually released years later, but she walked the rest of her life like a shadow. She rarely spoke. She never truly smiled again. They said she carried the weight of the guillotine in her silence. Outside the prison walls, the revolution continued to devour its own creators. The leaders who had called for the Queen's death soon turned on each other. Accusations spiraled. Trials became shorter, executions more frequent. The same blade that had taken Marie Antoinette soon claimed the heads of the men who had condemned her. Robespierre himself followed the path he forced her to walk. Same cart, same scaffold, same blade. The crowd that once screamed for her blood now screamed for his. Some said it was justice, others said it was the Queen's revenge. Years later, when the revolution had burned itself out and France tried to rebuild, whispers of her suffering resurfaced. People began to question the cruelty they once cheered. Pamphlets appeared describing her last days. Survivors who had watched her during the trial wrote down their memories. And slowly the image of the monster faded, replaced by the image of a woman caught in the jaws of a force far greater than her. Historians pieced together the truth. The endless surveillance, the searches, the humiliations, the forced examinations, the starvation, the isolation, the public mockery, the deliberate destruction of everything that made her human. What shocked future generations was not that she died by the guillotine. Many died that way. It was the slow ritual of humiliation that came before it, a dismantling of spirit, a methodical breaking of identity, a cruelty so intense that even revolutionaries later admitted it had been unnecessary. But her story did not end in the unmarked grave. Decades later, when her brother-in-law Louis XVIII restored the monarchy, he ordered the graves of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to be found. They searched through the cemetery, consulting records and accounts, until they uncovered a coffin matching the description. When they opened it, her remains were still wrapped in the cloth used to bind her after death. The bones were fragile, the shroud stained by years of damp soil. They carried her remains to the Basilica of Saint Denis, the burial place of French kings, and placed her beside her husband as she had once been in life. The crowds that gathered were silent. No anger, no words, only the sound of footsteps and whispered prayers. Even those who had no love for royalty felt a strange sadness at the sight of the broken remains of the woman once called the most hated in France. Time had softened judgment. Cruelty had become shame, and the queen whom the revolution tried to erase became a symbol not of tyranny, but of tragedy. Her story returned not because kings wanted it, but because people needed it, to understand how fear twists justice, how rage blinds mercy, how a crowd can become a weapon, and how a woman can suffer 1,000 invisible wounds before the blade ever touches her neck. In the centuries that followed, Marie Antoinette became a myth, a lesson, a warning. Painfully human in her flaws, but painfully human in her suffering. The execution had ended her life, but it was the humiliation before it that carved her story into the memory of the world. And long after the guillotine rusted, long after the revolution bled itself dry, long after her name passed from fury to pity, one truth remained. What happened to her before the blade fell was far worse than death.